Right then guys, here we are for the start of the 2000 season in my Stewart Manager series on Grand Prix World. Before we start the first Formula 1 race in the 21st century, I've got to go through the changes that have been made from 1999 to 2000. The biggest change by far was the $6 million factory upgrade we bought, and that means we can have an extra 10 people per department. So commercial negotiations and car design can be done quicker. We can manufacture more components between each race, and also we can ensure that our cars are always in perfect condition. Over the past 2 years we've had to enter races with partially worn cars. That probably won't happen ever again. I don't know if any other team has upgraded their factory, but assuming they haven't, our factory is now the same size as Benetton's and Sauber's. For comparison's sake, Williams, Ferrari and McLaren all have 4-star factories. Prost have a factory the same size as our previous one. Meanwhile, Minardi, Tyrrell, Arrows and even Jordan all have 1-star factories with only a 40 staff per department capacity. That makes Arrows and Jordan's previous seasons even more impressive, as they achieved an awful lot more than us with 20% fewer people. But then you've got Minardi, who in 1998 had only about 20 people per department, half of their capacity. There weren't even any highly skilled staff members. We may laugh at Minardi, but they were in even more of a tragic position than I ever realised. The thing which set Minardi back the most was their chassis. The same can be said for Tyrrell, apart from the fact that in 1999 they had a Mike Gascoigne chassis, so it was rated around 60%. But did you know, because I certainly didn't, that Tyrrell started off the 1998 season with a 25% rated chassis? Minardi had a 20% rated one. I can't understand how they were so bad. Tyrrell's especially, because Mike Gascoigne was with Tyrrell before 1998, but clearly he didn't pull his finger out until the start of that year. I believe that the massive jump in chassis quality from 1998 to 1999 was the sole reason Tyrrell jumped so far up the order and scored a handful of points last year. If Mike Gascoigne did that to Tyrrell, then what will his handiwork do for us? Well, we'll find out soon enough, as he has been with us since the start of last year, so this season will be our first one with a Mike Gascoigne chassis. Last year, Benetton and Prost were the two teams with the best chief designers, so should be the teams with the best chassis this year. Jordan, Sauber, Stewart and Williams all had 3-star chief designers, so will have 60% rated chassis at best. I know ours is rated 60% because we completed the design process in time. But I do want to point out that 1999 chassis are legal for this season, so a team could have a far worse chassis than they should, a la Williams last season. Arrows, Ferrari and McLaren, all race-winning teams last season, only had 2-star chief designers, so will have a 40% rated chassis at best. Yes, they can improve it as the season goes on, but to start with at least, their chassis will be awful. Not that it stopped Arrows last year, who did well with a chassis of an equal quality to the one they've got now. Tyrrell had a 1-star chief designer, so will likely have a chassis worse than the one they had in 1998. Dare I say it, I think they might be better off running last year's chassis. One team which I think will be running with a 1-year-old car is Minardi. Last year, and I didn't even realise it until recording for this video, but they never had a chief designer. They didn't even end the season with one, which I find baffling. There were 2 unemployed 3-star chief designers at the start of 1999, but I guess Minardi either couldn't afford them or convinced them to move to a team that far down the grid. You know your reputation is bad when people would rather be unemployed than work for you. I didn't realise you could even go into the following season without a chief designer, but I think on Grand Prix Manager 2, if you do that, a nameless, faceless assistant takes over. and because he would have been so lowly rated, I doubt he would have finished his design in time anyway. I was half joking when I said Tyrrell should run last year's car this year, but genuinely, I think Minardi would be better off running their 1999 car than their 2000 one. Their 1999 chassis was awful, but at least it was designed by a 2-star rated guy and was probably finished in time, or at least closer to being than this year's was. Do you know what makes things worse for Minardi? Their original chief designer has gone up to being 3-star rated, and in fact he was rated 3 stars last year. If Minardi stuck with him, they'd be in a half decent position for this year, as they'd have a 60% rated chassis. Instead, what could have been Minardi's chassis is now Jordan's. So this year Benetton and McLaren have the 2 best chief designers, with Jordan, Prost, Sauber, Stewart, Tyrrell and Williams all employing 3-star designers. The 2 Italian teams of Ferrari and Minardi have both only got 2-star chief designers, and Arrows only a 1-star designer. Of course that only really comes into play in 2001, but it will still impact just how much development each team can do over the course of this season. On to the commercial managers, and there's only 2 changes from last year to this one. Firstly, McLaren have got rid of 2-star rated Rumi in favour of 3-star rated Warren, and Prost actually have a commercial manager. That's right, in 1999 they didn't have one, but now they've got a 2-star rated manager, which is at least better than the assistant they would have had last year. All 11 teams had technical directors last year, and they've stayed with the same teams this year. The only things that have changed are Newey's and Simmons' ratings. Adrian Newey has gone down from 5-star to 4-star, and Pat Simmons down from 4 to 3 stars. Finally, there's the chief mechanics, and there's only 3 changes to speak of. Jordan and Ferrari have swapped chief mechanics, so now Ferrari have the 5-star rated Carl Gadden, and Jordan have the 4-star rated Dassault. Benetton have the same man in charge, but luckily for them his rating has gone up from 3 to 4 out of 5. On to the driver lineups for 2000, and a few changes have been made for the new millennium. Arrows have got the same drivers, and both are of an equal status for the 2nd year in a row. Eddie Irvine's performance in 1999 was far from stunning, and David Richards agreed, as he's replaced him with former Prost test driver and before that a non-F1 driver, Celso Moreira. The 24-year-old Brazilian isn't a pay driver, but he does have the same driving stats of one, although to his credit, he is marginally better than both Marini and Rainbow. He's Benetton's driver number 2, and Frentzen is still their number 1. Ferrari have exactly the same driver lineup on exactly the same terms. Jordan have kept Jean Alesi but ditched Esteban Tyrrell in favour of Eddie Irvine. Irvine's 1999 season was underwhelming, but the Northern Irishman might do better this year at the Irish team. McLaren have kept Coulthard and Hill and still have Coulthard listed as the driver 1. Rubens Barrichello is still the team's test driver. Minardi are fielding the same drivers, and again they are both on equal status. Staggeringly, Prost have got Jacques Villeneuve, the man who was fired by Williams before the end of 1999, but he is their test driver. That is despite the fact that Alberto Marini is still with the team and in the 2nd race seat. However, Jacques may get a race seat next year, as of course Mika Hakkinen has already announced that he plans to retire at the end of the season. Sauber have kept the same cheap yet effective drivers of Collard, Nakano and Sarrazin, all in the same driver roles. Both of our race drivers are entering the 2nd and final year of their 2-year contracts, and during the off-season, Tora Takaki did improve his speed stat. Tyrrell have still got Mika Salo as their driver number 1, Juan Pablo Montoya as their driver number 2, and Andrea Montemini as their test driver. Meanwhile, Williams have decided not to keep on Pierre Rainbow after his 2-race stint at the end of the 20th century, and instead they got in Esteban Tyrrell after he was dropped by Jordan. I assume Williams must be strapped for cash, hence why they got rid of Villeneuve before the end of 1999 and got a paid driver in to replace him. Esteban Tyrrell is also a paid driver and he's been given the number 1 seat, whilst the more talented Johnny Herbert is the driver number 2, and Olivier Panis is still the team's test driver despite being more than good enough for a race seat. Financially, we're going to be worse off than we were last year, as we didn't fill up all of our sponsor slots unlike the previous year. So our net income from sponsors and suppliers is down from 13.195 million to 9.95 million. Much more worryingly is the drop in funding from the FIA. I have no idea why the FIA and not the commercial rights holder, i.e. Bernie Ecclestone, is doing the prize money distribution, and I'll talk more about the FIA rankings in a later episode because it's a wonderfully weird and probably corrupt system. Anyway, last year, for whatever reason, as the FIA rankings are never explained at all, we were 8th in the FIA rankings, and as such will only receive $5.5 million from the FIA over the course of the year. Back in 1998, probably because we were a quicker team and scored a few points, the FIA placed us 6th in their rankings and gave us $12.5 million over the course of 1999. So all in all, we will be about $10 million worse off this year. Moving on to the engines for this season, and let's not forget that we've left Ferrari in favour of Mercedes. For context on this year's engines, here's how the first 3 engines were rated in 1999. Now here's how they're rated this year. You'll notice that on the whole the Mercedes and Ferrari engines have gone downhill slightly. This can be excused by the fact that the engines were intended to be downgraded as per the new regulations. So the Mercedes engine is down in fuel consumption and responsiveness, but is as reliable as ever and is as powerful as a Formula 1 engine can be. Ferrari have improved the rigidity and responsiveness of their engine to compensate for the reduction in several other ratings which went down by 1 or 2. Despite the intended downgrade, Peugeot bettered their engine by 1 in both fuel and rigidity to produce a well-rounded and competitive engine. Here's how the other 3 engines started the 1999 season. And here is how they'll start the 2000 season. The Mugen Honda engine went down by 1 in fuel, heat and reliability, but increased by 1 in rigidity. On balance, the Ford engine is roughly as good as it was last year, but they've made the engine more well-rounded. So it's no longer maxed out on fuel conservation, but a couple of ratings have improved, most notably the reliability rating, which is up from 3 to 4. Mechachrome will be supplying one less team this year, as Williams will now be getting their engines from Ford. You can understand why they left, as Mechachrome are on a downward trajectory and their one standout rating, reliability, has decreased by 1. The engines may well have been downgraded, well, by and large, but the tyres were intended to be upgraded and they certainly have been. Here's how they were in 1999, and here's how they are in 2000. Bridgestone and Goodyear have both produced some amazing tyres. I think Goodyear's are slightly better across the whole range, but I am biased as I'm getting my tyres from Goodyear. All of the top teams and Prost, who should do brilliantly this season, as well as Minardi, who really shouldn't, but by and large, all of the quick teams have sourced their tyres from Bridgestone. Meanwhile, Jordan, Arrows, Tyrrell, Stewart and Sauber have all got Goodyear tyres on a range of different agreements. Finally, there's the fuels, and Tyrrell have got a partnership deal with, theoretically, industry leaders Mobil, and Jordan have got a works deal with Shell. Benetton and Minardi have both got multi-year deals with Texaco, Sauber and McLaren have both gone to Total for their fuel. I start my 3-season long contract with AGIP, whilst Prost are only with them for 1 year, but do have the worst deal. Williams are one of the many teams to still be with the same fuel supplier, although I don't know why Williams are still with the lowest rated fuel supplier in the game. And finally, Ferrari and Arrows are still with ELF and on the same terms. The rules asked for no change in the fuel supplied heading into the new millennium, but some suppliers were able to make small improvements. Here's the fuel stats in 1999, and here's what they are in 2000. No suppliers took a backward step, and most weren't able to find any improvement. The ones that did include Petrobras, who improved their performance by 2, Repsol by 1, Shell by 2, and finally Total, who improved their performance by 1. And they were the only supplier to improve their engine tolerance rating, and they did by 1. The only comment I'll make about the fuels is that all of the suppliers have either one good stat and one lowly rated stat, or they have 2 mediocre stats. There are ones which are better than others. For example, ELF have 3 out of 10 on their lower stat, but 9 out of 10 on their prioritised stat. Meanwhile, Petrobras have the same level lowest stat, but their better stat is only 7 out of 10, 2 lower than ELF's. The only supplier which doesn't have one good stat or a balance between the two is AGIP. Yes, the fuel supplier I'm with not only for 2000 but for 2001 and 2002 haven't started off our relationship well. I just have to hope they up their game in later seasons because I didn't strike a deal which allowed me to do any personal R&D, so I'm stuck with what they give me. Anyway, moving on from the fact we've got the worst fuel on the grid, I'm going to quickly talk about my aims commercially for this season. So as I mentioned earlier, this team's yearly income is down by around $10 million, which equates to $625,000 per race. That takes this team from a massive profit-making operation to a team which consistently operates around the break-even point. That's fine if you have the savings to survive the season, but since I spent $6 million upgrading the factory, we barely have anything in the bank. Also, the better factory has increased overheads and it can accommodate more people. So we're employing more people to get up to our new 60 people per department capacity, but paying for the salaries of an extra 40 people won't be cheap. So in short, income is down from where we were last year, and costs are up and ever increasing. At best, this team will be making small profits per race. At worst, we'll be losing money with every race we compete in, and we don't have the bank balance to absorb the losses. So I'm going to speak to a team sponsor to see if they'll fund us for next season. I know it's ambitious, and it's made more difficult by the fact that Red Bull, the lowest rated team sponsor, already have a deal in place with Arrows for next season. So Buzz and Hornets, the 2-star team sponsor, are our best bet. Both of our race drivers' contracts will elapse at the end of the season, and I'm quite keen to get rid of at least one of them. Takaki is one of the lowest rated drivers on the grid, and Diniz is okay at best. The biggest room for improvement in this team is with our drivers. But the simple fact of the matter is that if we didn't have Diniz and Takaki funding the team last year as well as this year, Stewart would have gone bust. For this team to be no longer dependent on them, we need a new and major source of income. I'm also in talks with Mercedes, Ford and Peugeot. They all produced top tier engines and crucially, all offer works deals. If I can convince one of them to give us engines plus millions of dollars, that would be another solution to our financial woes. Again, it's unlikely they will based on Stewart's less than illustrious history. But I hope our improved performance this year will change their opinion of us. Even if none of them offer us a works deal, I'll still want to compare their partner offers since I do need to arrange some engines for 2001. Now with all of that out of the way, let's move on to the final part of this episode, but the first race of the season, the 2000 Australian Grand Prix. In a matter of moments we'll start the first race of the season, but as you can see, Michael Schumacher, the reigning drivers' champion, is in car number 1 with his teammate Fisichella in car number 2. Then you've got both McLaren drivers with David Coulthard as the McLaren driver number 1 still. He's in car number 3, Damon Hill car number 4. Then you've got Benetton, Frentzen in car number 5, Celso Moreira in car number 6. I just don't understand how he's got a race seat, I really don't. Anyway, Wirtz, Magnussen, Alesi, Irvine, Nakano, Collard and Takaki, but you have to go all the way down to Williams. Look, Williams are fielding cars number 18 and 19. That's how bad of a season they had last year. I mean, someone did actually comment not that long ago that the car numbering system makes no sense, and they're completely correct, because Tyrrell did pretty well last season. They scored a handful of points. They shouldn't be fielding cars number 20 and 21. I mean, they should have a car number lower than ours. You know, we've got car number 14 and 15, which is less than Tyrrell. How's that happened? Anyway, let's head on into the qualifying session. So, a dry qualifying session for the 2000 Australian Grand Prix. Actually, yes, I should briefly mention, here's our hard tyre from Goodyear for this season, and there's our soft tyre. It's as good as or inferior to the hard tyre in every way, so for the time being at least, we'll be sticking with the hard compound tyre. Heinz-Harald Frentzen has taken pole position for the first round of the 2000 season, with Giancarlo Fisichella in second, and Celso Moreira, the second Benetton driver in his debut Formula 1 race, he's qualified in third. He's beaten David Coulthard in the McLaren. Johnny Herbert, who's in fifth. In fact, actually, Johnny Herbert, the Williams driver, in fifth. That means Williams are more or less where you would expect them to be. Well, Johnny Herbert is, because Tyrrell is down in 13th. And actually, Takaki has beaten Diniz. Now that is very odd actually. Tora Takaki, on paper the worst of our two drivers, was the quickest in qualifying, and there's a 4/10 gap between our two drivers. And actually, Takaki is the quickest Goodyear runner. Well, that's some achievement. Yeah, it really is. He's beaten Montoya, Mekasalo, so both Tyrrell drivers, and Eddie Irvine in the Jordan. In fact, well, let me just run down through the grid. So, you've got Frentzen on pole position, then Fisichella, Moreira. Fantastic qualifying performance for the Brazilian. Then you've got David Coulthard in 4th place. Johnny Herbert, fantastic turnaround from last season. Johnny Herbert now in 5th place. Damon Hill in 6th. Michael Schumacher, the reigning drivers' champion, is in 7th. Tora Takaki, only 1 place behind Michael Schumacher. Then you've got Juan Pablo Montoya, Mekasalo, Eddie Irvine has beaten his teammate. Pedro Diniz down in 12th, Esteban Tyrrell in 13th. In fact, there's Jean Alesi in 14th in the other Jordan. So that means Jean Alesi, for the first time in a long time, was beaten by a teammate. Then you've got Jarno Trulli in 15th. That's pretty good for Minardi. Then Shinji Nakano. Actually, Jarno Trulli in the Minardi beat a former Minardi driver. So you've got Nakano in 16th, Ricardo Rosset in the other Minardi in 17th, then Collard in 18th. Actually, Sauber have really gone downhill. Because on balance, Minardi beat Sauber. That's really quite surprising, actually, to see Sauber fall that close to the bottom of the grid. That's actually really quite shocking. Although, not as shocking as that. What? That's a very good point, actually. Prost weren't at the front of the grid. I didn't even notice. Because Benetton have got the joint best chassis on the grid. You can tell. Frentzen took pole position. Moreira qualified in 3rd. That's fantastic for a guy who has never competed in a Formula 1 session until now. But Prost have got the other joint best chassis. But they're a way off. Mika Hakkinen has qualified in 21st place. Marini in 22nd, but they're not even close. And Arrows, another shock. Because Arrows last season were phenomenal. I mean, they were winning races, they got a 1-2 finish in the Spanish Grand Prix, but very little has changed at Arrows from last season to this season, yet their competitiveness has changed massively. Because everyone else is qualifying, well, pole position was done in the low 1 minute 30s, then you've got, even Takaki was in the 1 minute 30s, although high 1 minute 30s, Diniz in the 1 minute 31s. I mean, you go down all the way to Minardi, they're in the 1 minute 32s, and Sauber, but then you have to go to the 1 minute 33s, high 1 minute 33s to get to Arrows, and then in the very high 1 minute 34s is Prost. So it's going to be a very dry Australian Grand Prix, and amazingly, we've actually got a realistic shot of scoring points. Let's see if we do. Takaki, he's done it! Tora Takaki has finished the 2000 Australian Grand Prix in 4th place. Fantastic! So you've got Michael Schumacher, he's won the 2000 Australian Grand Prix, beating his teammate by half a second. Even still, it's a Ferrari 1-2, so who knows whether it will be that way over the course of the entire season, because Benetton were the quickest team in qualifying, but clearly encountered some reliability issues. Only 11 drivers finished this race. So Ferrari got both of their drivers in the points. Williams, what a turnaround! Last season they were at the back of the grid. I think arguably the slowest team. I think they were even slower than Minardi. Yet, one season later, they finally got their act together. Johnny Herbert has taken the final podium spot. Tora Takaki was only 5 seconds behind. And also Takaki finished as the leading Goodyear runner. So Bridgestone occupy the top 3 points places, Goodyear the bottom 3. This could be very good actually. If we become Goodyear's top team, then we might get priority in terms of tyre upgrades. I mean, contractually we shouldn't, but I don't know, it's possible, hopefully. Mika Salo in 5th, Juan Pablo Montoya in 6th. Tyrrell, again, in 1998 were, at the back with Minardi. Last season, yes, they scored 4 points. This season, already, they've scored 3 points. Both of their drivers in the points at the same time. They beat Jean Alesi in the Jordan, Emmanuel Collard in the Sauber, Alex Wurz in the Arrows, who finished, and that's all I can really say, and he did beat Nakano in the Sauber. Jan Magnussen, the slowest finisher, although both Minardi drivers had brakes failures, so I imagine that's something they need to work on, their brakes reliability. And who else retired? Well, a lot of people actually. Celso Moreira for a electronics failure, so not due to him, and actually he was one of the last drivers to retire, so I don't know where he was running when he retired. I could actually look that up, but I think he might have been... Do you know what? It is actually conceivable that he could have been leading the race when he retired. Possibly. I'll look that up. Damon Hill, yet again with a engine issue, although... No! Because McLaren don't have a Mercedes engine, I forgot! I was about to say, that's incredibly unlucky because, Damon Hill had a lot of reliability issues last season. But I was about to say the Mercedes engine this season is incredibly reliable, but they've got the Ford engine, which I think isn't very reliable. I think 4 out of 10 reliability. So, there you go. Eddie Irvine out with a electronics issue. Wow, double engine failure for McLaren. Frentzen out with a gearbox issue. That's a shame, bearing in mind he took pole position. Pedro Diniz. I'm really starting to question who our best driver is, because on paper it should be Pedro Diniz. Last season, Diniz was the better driver. Not massively, but he was definitely better. But, I know we've only done 1 race this season, but in qualifying, Diniz was 4 tenths off. I think, to be fair, we saw a similar level of gap Diniz qualifying that much quicker than Takaki last season. It's just, it looks worse for Diniz this season because there were several drivers separating the teammates. Even still, Pedro Diniz, he was slow in qualifying, and a driver mistake in the race, that's bad. Tyrrell out with a electronics issue, and Prost. Well, Minardi must have a brakes issue. Well, unreliable brakes, which is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. You would not want to be Trulli or Rosset. How would you feel stepping into a car which you know has dodgy brakes? Terrifying. I mean, Prost, the two first drivers to retire, both with hydraulics issues, less terrifying but equally embarrassing. Well, there's the Drivers' Championship, and of course, it's just a reflection of the race results, but Tora Takaki, for the time being, is 4th in the Drivers' Championship. I think that's the highest any of our drivers will ever be, but 4th place, fantastic. And also, in the Constructors' Championship, joint 3rd. Joint 3rd. We're only 1 point off of Williams. Ferrari are romping off into the distance already, although we've only done one race. There's 15 left to go, and there were a lot of teams to have double retirements. Benetton, McLaren, Prost, Minardi. All of those teams had both of their drivers to retire. Ferrari had both of their drivers finish. So, reliability certainly helped out Ferrari because Benetton, I think, amazingly, are the quicker team. So this was how the Australian Grand Prix played out. So as you can see, Moreira qualified in 3rd place, very quickly dropped down to 4th, then 5th, then 6th, then 7th. That's within 6 laps. Moreira dropped from 3rd to 7th in 6 laps. Then he's got a massive, in fact really ongoing battle with car number 3, that is David Coulthard. So a really good scrap between himself and David Coulthard. He's on top, then drops a load of positions. Don't know why, whether that's a pit stop or whether that's a mistake. There's a yellow box around him, but either way he dropped down to 11th. Yeah, because then he gradually makes up places, so he's into 7th place. Right, so I assume that was an early pit stop, so he's in 7th place, and right, so on lap 42 he's in 7th place, and then he disappears? I don't understand. Hang on, so he... Okay, I think this lap chart doesn't really track when a driver retires, but the last time car number 6 appears is lap 42. There isn't a number 6 on lap 43. So I think Moreira retired on lap 42 and he was in 7th when he retired. So that's everything for this episode, and would you look at that, Tora Takaki 4th in the Drivers' Championship with 3 points to his name. 3 points, that's pretty good going after only one race. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to leave a like, comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next episode where we carry on with the 2000 Formula 1 season. So I'll see you guys then.